Contenders. This is for the limited series Mrs. America, and it is sensational. I can tell you, I watched it riveted through the whole thing, and I learned a lot. We have, let me just count them down here, Cate Blanchett, who plays Phyllis Schlafly. Hi, Cate.
Schlafly.
Yeah. We have Rose Byrne, who plays Gloria Steinem. We have Aduba, who plays Shirley Chisholm. We have Tracy Ullman here, who plays Betty Friedan. We have Margot Martindale, who plays Bella Abzug. We have Sarah Paulson, who's playing a fictionalized character, kind of a combination of people, Alice here. And we have Elizabeth Banks, who plays Jill Ruckelshaus. Hi, guys. What a collection here. And this is a fascinating show. I want to introduce people to it a little bit here and show a clip, but it is basically set around the time of the fight for the ERA, which the fight is still going on, but also women's liberation, the feminist movement, and everything. It's all put together here. And Phyllis Schlafly is the conservative voice who was trying to stop it all. And you all play different characters involved in this fight. So let's take a look at a clip from Mrs. America.
Let me be clear. I am not against women succeeding. I am not against women working outside the home. That's their choice. But what I am against is a small elitist group of Northeastern establishment liberals putting down homemakers. Now, the libbers love to say that they're dedicated to choice. But if you dare to choose the path of full-time mother, well, there must be something wrong with you. I mean, if you don't feel enslaved, well, you're just dumb and unenlightened. In fact, you're not even a person. Because you see, the women's liberation movement is basically a very negative attitude toward life. It tells women, sister, the cards are stacked against you. When you wake up in the morning, you won't get a job. And if you do, it won't be a good one. And if you get a good one, you won't get promoted. And if you get married, your husband will treat you like a servant. And marriage is just a lot of dirty diapers and dirty dishes.
All right, Cate, I have to ask you, I have to start with you, because not only do you play Phyllis, you are also an executive producer of this. And this is your first big television project here. I got to ask why this appealed to you and why you wanted to take this on. Because a lot of people look at Phyllis and they don't look too kindly on her, and others do. But it was an interesting character to play, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was just an extension of what I'm always interested in as an actor. It's being part of something. So in a way, the character that I ended up playing is kind of a secondary thing. But for me, it was, I think I was reeling like a lot of us from the 2016 election and trying to reverse engineer about how women could vote for the man who currently sits in the White House. And just to try and understand that. And also it was a period of history that I thought I knew a lot about, second wave feminism, but I didn't know who Phyllis was. And I had no idea about how polarizing she was and really how she put a lot of things into what we understand as being the Republican Party platform now. And I think I generally, apart from playing someone that felt so far away from me, I was interested in trying to understand what was so terrifying for people about the notion of equality. I found that a really prescient and timely kind of thing to delve into.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating to see this character because it's mentioned in the series too. A lot of people looked at her and said, you know, she may be more of a feminist in some ways than the other characters in her own way, because she was working in an all-male driven world trying to break through. And that's something I never thought about with her at all.
Yeah, I feel like I'm working in an all-male world trying to break through. So, I don't know what's changed, but yes, I mean that was part of the. I mean, look, I grew up in the backlash to second wave feminism, where I thought feminism was about equality, and I didn't realize, I think, until I started to do the deep research for Mrs. America, that all of that negative baggage that came with calling oneself a feminist in the 80s, it came out of all of these sort of just the strive for equality by feminists in the 70s. So that was it was a fascinating thing, I think, for all of us to see how much has changed, but also how little the language has changed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Now, Rose, you're playing Gloria Steinem. She's still with us, too. I don't know if you ever had the chance to actually meet her or anything. What was your approach to playing Gloria Steinem in this?
I didn't get to meet Gloria, unfortunately. I've never met her. I don't know if it would have helped. It probably would have been very intimidating, I imagine. But I didn't really know where to start because there's so much on Gloria, obviously. Her own writings and then all the historical archival sort of writings and articles and so on and so forth. So Darby Waller, the showrunner, she sent me a package to begin with because I was like, I don't know where to begin. And she sent me a package of, things to start to read, which was really helpful because it was quite overwhelming trying to figure out where to begin.
Wow. The voice, you got that voice down. How difficult was that? And how much work did you put into that I feel like I'm watching Gloria Steinem when I'm watching your performance, and it's not an impression, but it was very unique to her.
Thanks. I started working with Kate Wilson, who is one of the lead vocal teachers at Juilliard, and she was really helpful a couple of months early on, like before we started shooting. Her voice was so specific. I hadn't really heard her speaking that much, particularly back then, from the period of when we're starting the show in the 70s. It was quite distinctive. But Kate was great because you obviously don't want to be thinking about the voice when you're doing it. You want to be able to be fluid in the scene and everything. So she was really helpful in finding all the colours in there. But, it's definitely that very Midwestern Ohio kind of flat-sounding, very specific sound.
Yeah. Tracy, you're playing Betty Friedan. Many people certainly know Betty Friedan. She was right out there at the beginning of the feminist movement. What kind of things did you discover in playing Betty?
The same as Rose. I mean, there's so much you can research, from public appearances they made, and but it's finding out, knowing what they're like in private and how they were amongst each other and how they spoke to each other, without pontificating or. But yes, I loved being Betty. I had to fight really hard for this role. I think I've mentioned that before. It was, I really want to be a part of this group of wonderful actresses, and I used to try and draw on her. Betty was quite extraordinary person. I think she had a huge ego. I love her voice. Talk about Midwest. She was Midwest, Peoria. And everyone thinks she's a New Yorker. No. And that was, but there was a lot to research on her. And her book, The Feminine Mystique, she wrote the book. And although she was like that generation before all these ladies here, she wrote that amazing book. Couldn't take it away from her. It was brilliant.
Yeah, Margot, I have to ask you too. Bella Abzug seems so bigger than life. Of course, the hats, the look, that accent too. But what about playing Bella Abzug? You played so many interesting characters in your career. Where does she fit in terms of this?
Well, it was a huge responsibility, and I felt overwhelmed by it. I started with a dialect coach 2 months before, Coley Calhoun, and I watched many videos, and as Tracy said, it's very hard to find anything where you see who these people are in private, and that was sort of up to our imaginations. And I love that part about it because you could find the vulnerability in that, and the relationship between Betty and Bella was and Shirley and Gloria. I mean, we all were tight. They had a very close relationship, a very close friendship. And so did she and Betty. They loved each other, and she couldn't help but love Betty, and just despise her at the same time. And then Shirley, of course, Margot Martindale loved Shirley so much. So, I mean, and Bella loved Shirley. Shirley just didn't follow the rules.
Yeah, I have to say, you mentioned Shirley Chisholm, and of course, Luzo, you're terrific as her, and I think you're introducing a lot of people to her. I know who she is. I have a bumper sticker,
Oh, wow.
Wow.
which I got at the convention, that McGovern convention that you put in.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And I can tell you from watching this, when I watched that sequence there, I'm going like, oh my God, they got this so right, because I was an alternate.
And you never stuck it on your gremlin.
No. But Uzo, you played her.
Because it had exploded.
You played her, and I never thought of her in this whole world, like some of the other characters here. That was a revelation to me. I knew her from when she ran in Congress and everything.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I would say the same thing. I would agree. I never thought of her as part so intricately woven into the Women's Caucus and the second wave movement. But what Margot was just touching on, I think, is 100%. The fact that all of these women were tethered to one another, that there were, I think the thing that I was most excited about in doing this project is learning there was just so many women who were a part of this movement and advance, and who had such powerful seats and voices, and who, frankly, time had forgotten a lot of. And what an amazing thing that you get to see and hear these names, hear their stories, their individual stories today. And I think there's a host of women who know them, who were maybe there like yourself, in that time. But there is an entire generation of people who did not know all of their names. And I think it's just amazing that we get to hear their names. That I think it's amazing that there are people are getting to hear Betty Friedan's name and know her relevance in a larger way, getting to hear, Bella Abzug's name and understand it in a larger way, hear Shirley Chisholm's name, understand it in a larger way, and understand that the pillars on which we all stand, that there were a lot of legs and a lot of women in the trenches making that happen. And including on both sides, It was a movement on both sides of women.
Yeah, when you talk about both sides, a lot of people are surprised, especially in today's polarized society, to see a Republican, Jill Ruckelshaus, who was very much her husband in the Nixon administration and everything, very much a feminist, very much in this movement, Elizabeth. And that was another revelation from this series.
I think, I agree. I didn't know about Jill Ruckelshaus before I started this process. And I also got a great packet from Davi, the creator of the show, to introduce me to her. I think the best thing about her is that she reminds everyone that bipartisanship was so much a part of what these women were trying to do, that they were trying to be as inclusive as possible, and, with limitations, of course, but they tried. And I also thought it was important to remind people that politics was not always the way it is right now, that we were not always as divisive, that there was more cooperation across the aisle, that there was always, you never were going to get everything that you wanted from the other side, but we had to have compromise in order to function in the best way possible. I think clearly when you have no cooperation, we don't function as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And Sarah, you're playing a fictionalized character, kind of a composite of women here on the other side here with Phyllis. And why was it important to have a character like this?
Well, I mean, I certainly think you have an opportunity there to fictionalize the plight of a woman on the other side who feels largely unseen in the context of the movement, and who feels that, everywhere she looks, that the movement is a real threat to her. It's sort of threatening her worldview, her comfort, where she feels a source of power, which is as a homemaker, and is very devoted to that and feels very fulfilled by doing that. And there's a movement of women sort of suggesting that to feel that way is somehow a negative. And I don't know. I mean, I was absolutely jealous of all these women getting to, play these iconic women and walking into the hair and makeup trailer and seeing everyone's picture with the real life person, and then what the extraordinary hair and makeup people on this show did with helping everybody achieve that look. And also really fun to dive into all that research and stuff. But it was ultimately had its bonuses too to be able to do this other thing.
Well, it's so fascinating. Cate, I do have to ask you too. This has been on. I suddenly am reading so much more about the ERA amendment again that fell out, and that people are now still trying to get that through. And it looks like the television project here can be a part of that, in re-energizing the movement here. Is that another appeal of being on television here with something like this?
Well, it's a very complicated thing. I mean, throughout the course of development, there were so many strands of the story that people were saying, look, this is an important part of the women's movement, like the reproductive freedom. But do we need a whole episode around it? And then, of course, the fetal heartbeat ruling was passed. And you think as each week went by, it just became increasingly relevant. And in post-production, Virginia became the 38th state to ratify the ERA. But of course, it's way past the ratification deadline. And I think it's been made clear from the White House that it's not going back on the agenda anytime soon. But it is bizarre to me that in a democracy that prides itself on so many wonderful things, that equality isn't enshrined as a fundamental tenet in that document, because it seems to be something that is foundational in Americans' understanding of themselves. You can only wonder how things might have been handled differently if equality was a fundamental tenet in American democracy. It might be different. So, but it's been playing on my mind a lot, certainly a lot.
Well, we can only hope, and I hope everybody gets a chance to see Mrs. America. And if I had one more square here, we could play Hollywood Squares. So I have to throw this right now to my colleague here, Anthony D'Alessandro, who has another show from FX.
This is the Deadline Contenders panel for FX's Better Things.